Imagine, it's the winter of 1916. War had been raging on in Europe for over 2 years with no end in sight. In some ways, a lot had changed since the start of the war. In many ways, nothing had changed at all.
The line along the Western Front had barely altered despite the best efforts of the British Expeditionary Force and the French Army to break through the resolute German positions. Numerous offensives, millions of artillery shells and bullets, hundreds of thousands of men dead, and to no avail.
But this was a war in which weapons technology and strategy was rapidly evolving, and at any point, a breakthrough seemed possible. Reconnaissance and fighter planes were now heard in the skies above. Artillery now accurately bolstered infantry advances, and for us, the British, tanks were introduced to the battlefield.
Only time would tell if 1916 would be the turning point British High Command hoped for. But in this episode, I was heading out of the dugout and right into the heart of the action. Stationed at the front lines in Belgium and France, I'd find out what life was like for the average British Tommy in the trenches.
Absolutely disgusting stuff.
How they prepared for battle.
Fix! Bayonets!
Imagine a year 7 with a machine gun that could knock down a brick wall at 2 kilometres.
And how they dealt with the consequences of it.
Brain surgery? There would be brain surgery happening?
You've got neurosurgery going on. He's not just rebuilding people's faces, he's also giving their lives back as well.
The question is, could you survive as a British infantry soldier on the Western Front? It hadn't taken long after war broke out in 1914 for a deadlock to ensue along the Western Front. As both Allied and Central powers entrenched themselves in a brutal stalemate, a series of major offensives and counter-offensives had resulted in staggering losses on both sides, yielding meagre territorial gains. By early 1916, the British Army had already lost more soldiers than in any conflict throughout its history. The deadly, mud-caked stalemate of trench warfare had started to take its toll, and an atmosphere of despondency seeped through the British ranks. After failing to break through the German lines, which stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps, the Allies began to develop a new plan. A big push on the Western Front, which would coincide with attacks by Russia and Italy to the east and south. As with any major offensive, preparation began with mass conscription. Lord Kitchener's campaign, promoted by his famous "Your Country Wants You" poster, had encouraged over 1 million men to enlist by January 1915. But based on the army's casualty rate and the scale of the planned offensive, this was nowhere near enough. The government saw no alternative but to increase numbers by passing the Military Service Act in January 1916. This imposed conscription on all single men, with certain occupational exemptions, aged between 18 and 41, soon to be extended to all married men, when a second act was passed later in the year. Once you got the call, passed some routine medical examinations, swore your oath of allegiance and joined a unit, you'd be sent to basic training camp, where you'd learn army discipline, drill, and how to use your weapons. Following this, a short ferry across the channel, and within days you'd be at the front, where you'd come face to face with your commanding officer. Today, I was reporting to Captain Richard Townsley.
Sir, welcome to the front.
Well, it's quite a spectacle, Captain Townsley. Tell me a bit about from the moment that these soldiers are either they volunteer or they're conscripted. What's the process like from back in Britain to the Western Front? What kind of training do they go through, and how long does it take?
Well, firstly, what happens is you get recruited. Then you have to go through a series of tests, physical tests. You've got to swear allegiance on the oath of allegiance, and then you've got to go through and see the medical officer. And so at that point, then you have to be a certain height, no illnesses, etc. And then once you're passed fit by the medical officer, then you can carry on with your training. Basic training in the British Army in 1914 is 12 weeks. So you learn how to soldier, you learn how to march, you drill, route marches, physical training, all of those sort of things, weapon handling.
So all that basic training, it starts off in England,
yes,
doesn't it?
Back in the depot.
Right, okay. And then you get sent over
Yes.
by ferry. What happens then?
Then what you need to do is you need to go to battle school, and there's some very famous battle schools at a place called Etaples, very famous for things called the bull rings. Often known as a very sort of brutal place. The soldiers didn't like it, the instructors were quite harsh on them, but you're being trained to deal with the trenches, how to live, how to fight, how to exist in the trenches. So we're talking bayonet fighting, we're talking trench routine, all of that stuff is taught there. When you've then passed that, you're sent to the front.
Let's travel back to 1914. You have a lot of men volunteering. There's a big propaganda campaign. We always think of that Lord Kitchener poster. So the people in 1914, they're mostly volunteers, and then conscription gets sort of introduced later on in the war, correct?
That's right, yes. So you have a mass recruiting thing right at the start of the First World War. You see posters, you see all sorts of different recruiting posters. Come and join the front, be part of it. Women of Britain say go,
Yes,
don't stay at home. You'd want to get to the front. You'd want to be part of the adventure. Don't think of sad Tommies in trenches at this point. Army life, you get paid well, relatively well, a shilling a day.
Yeah.
You get fed well, 4,000 calories a day, and to your backstreet miner up in Bradford or something like that up in the north, that's decent food.
It's not a bad deal, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You get medical care, the best medical care anywhere in the world, the finest doctors, the best surgeons. And you get adventure as well. We're talking of a time with the British Empire. You could get sent to India, you could get sent to Hong Kong, you could get sent to the South Atlantic somewhere, or Fiji or something like that. You could come home and after the war, racks of medals, strolling down the high street. Oh, there, how are you going? I haven't seen you for a while.
Absolutely.
War
So
stories.
it's the adventures of the Empire, and of course, you can do it with your mates at the start, right?
Absolutely.
Pals
There's a-
battalions.
yeah.
Tell me a bit about that. These are big, towns and cities you could join up with your friends.
Pals battalions. What a great idea for recruiting. Sign up with your friends, serve with your friends, do your basic training with your friends. You'll never be separated from your mates, the people you grew up with in your streets and in your towns.
Whilst the Secretary of State for War believed that overwhelming manpower, encouraged by the opportunity of serving alongside one's friends, was key to winning the conflict, others believed it would be the newly and better equipped Tommy that would lead to victory. By 1916, having learnt from the first 2 years of the war, British soldiers were provided with the best uniforms and military equipment of the time.
Talk to me a bit about what I'm wearing as a soldier in 1916 and whether any of this stuff develops. I know that, for instance, they wouldn't have been wearing this at the start of the war.
Starting at the bottom, we have our ammunition boots, so our B5s in this instance. So in the First World War, what they do is they apply dubbing to them. What we're trying to do is keep our boots as waterproof as possible. Standing orders say that in the trenches, every day, soldiers will change their socks. That's the one piece of clothing you will change every day, is your socks. You put dry ones, you put things like whale oil on your feet to try and keep your feet dry.
Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that when I put these boots on, I've got spikes underneath, almost like studs.
Like almost like golf shoes.
Yes, what's that about?
This will give you grip on your boots, stop you falling over.
Yeah.
And also, it will stop the boots wearing out. It's a thing of supply. If you've got 150,000 soldiers who need boots, new boots, it's much better to give them studs at the bottom, so they'll wear out and you just replace the studs.
That makes sense. And moving up, we've got this sort of cloth that you wrap around your boots and your trousers.
What we've got here are puttees. Puttees, it doesn't sound like a very English word, does it? Puttees is an Indian word and it means wraps or bandages. The whole idea of puttees are to support your legs when you're marching, to finish off the bottom of your trousers, stop them flailing around the bottom. And the British Army fights in lots of different climates, places where there might be big scorpions or things. It stops things going into your boots,
Right, okay.
that sort of thing.
Infantrymen were clothed with a tunic based on Norfolk shooting jackets, with plenty of pockets for personal items and field dressings, warm trousers and webbing which could house 60 pounds of equipment, including rifle rounds and gas masks. The most notable change from the start of the war, however, was what British soldiers were wearing on their heads.
At the start of the First World War, they're marching to the trenches, they're marching off to war, and they're wearing a soft woolen cap on their head.
Unbelievable.
Oh, it's all very well. When you're in the trenches, you're protected by the front, the parapet. You're protected by a wall of earth at the back, the parados. What isn't protected so much is your head. And so, late 1915, they introduced the Brodie shrapnel helmet to stop casualties. The weird thing is, when they introduced the Brodie shrapnel helmet, they see a massive spike in head injuries that have to be treated in hospitals. So we're seeing more head injuries. Now we've got helmets. We've now armoured your head, so we're seeing more head injuries. So does that mean the helmets are working?
Well, my guess is actually maybe it means they are working.
More people survive. If you've got a woolen cap on your head and a piece of shrapnel goes through your head, you're dead.
You're going to be dead. Yeah.
If you're wearing one of these things, it may bounce off, or it may penetrate the helmet and be slowed down so much it just becomes an injury. And so these helmets are working and they're saving so many lives.
Yeah.
The Brodie helmet, referred to by the German army as the salad bowl, would go on to be produced over 7 million times by the end of World War I, and would, in a variety of variants, continue to be used by the British Army until the late 1960s. Another piece of equipment which remained standard issue for British infantrymen throughout the First and Second World Wars, known for taking lives as opposed to saving them, was the Lee Enfield bolt-action rifle.
This remains the same from the start of the war to the end of the war, but it's the trusty Lee Enfield rifle, albeit perhaps with some adaptations.
Right, yes. Okay, so pass that over to me.
Yes.
So this is the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle. Arguably one of the best trench weapons or trench rifles. It's better suited to the trenches than the Mauser G98. It's well designed, it's accurate, it's fast firing. You've got 10 rounds in the magazine here. The German rifle, the G98, the Gewehr 98, has only got 5 rounds. We've got an instant 5-round advantage here. It's fast firing, it's fast loading. Up here, in, fire, fire.
Rapid rate of fire.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've got pockets for ammunition. On this side, you've got 75 rounds in charger clips. On this side, you've got 75. So you've got
That's a lot of rounds.
150 rounds for your rifle. That's about 10 minutes steady firing.
Yeah.
You can take off the entire equipment in one go, like a waistcoat. It all stays together. If you look at the German equipment, if you look at the French equipment, you're putting it on bit by bit by bit, crossing over straps, all this sort of stuff. This is excellent stuff. What you're wearing today, it looks archaic to us, it looks old-fashioned to us, but this is the best set of equipment that any European army's got.
Having learnt their lessons from the Zulu and Boer Wars, the British Army strove to become the best equipped force in Europe. Whilst elements of the French and German army uniforms harped back to the Napoleonic era, with their red pantaloons and pickelhaube helmets, the British had finally ditched their redcoat and adopted an early form of multi-terrain pattern uniform. The Lee Enfield was also a huge step up from the breech-loading Martini Henry and Lee Metford bolt-action rifles used in the wars of the late 19th century. Whilst basic equipment did not vary from soldier to soldier, your rank and roll on the front line would determine the weapons you used to defend yourself and your comrades. The Lee Enfield was by and large the primary weapon for the British infantry soldier, but it certainly wasn't the only one used against the Hun.
So, Captain, when thinking about the First World War, my mind certainly leaps straight to this thing. This causes a lot of devastation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So what you've got here is the Vickers medium machine gun. Accurate and reliable. A weapon that was designed around the Maxim gun. In 1912, the Vickers company took a Maxim gun, turned upside down the mechanism inside, and therefore the Vickers gun was born.
Tell me how we would fire this thing.
Okay, so what you do, to load it, first of all, you would put the belt up here, belts of 250 normally, 303, .303. That's exactly the same round as the rifle fires. So the short magazine Lee Enfield will fire exactly so the ammunition is interchangeable.
Right.
You crank a few through, you feed it through, you crank a few through, and it's good to go. You need to keep it topped up inside here with water.
Yeah.
As you fire the machine gun, the barrel's going to get hot. And so if you don't have a way of keeping it cool, that barrel will distort and melt. And so they get around this with this fluted jacket around here, which is filled with water. At the front, there'd be a hose, and it leads down into a petrol can.
Yeah.
And as the water evaporates through there, it's connected inside the tank down here, and then you can recycle it and refill it again.
So there's a lot of components going on here. It doesn't sound exactly like it's very portable.
Not really. It's one of those weapons that you set up and leave in a certain space. You can use it for direct fire through that way, or you can use it for indirect fire. And so at which point the barrel will be aimed up in the air, and essentially what you're doing is you're firing at a grid reference. And so every so often you'd choose a grid reference where you'd know there'd be a crossroad or something like that, and you'd loose off a belt of 250 at that point. You can't see it, but you know the round's going to go over, and behind the lines, behind the German lines, you know, you'll be wreaking havoc with a machine gun, and they can't even see the gun.
So it's not just firing at oncoming infantry going over the top. You're actually tactically firing over the top of the trenches, predicting where certain targets are going to be.
Absolutely, yes.
Got it, okay. And then the actual process of firing, so I can see here it's a push mechanism, isn't it?
That's right. So you'd use the cocking handle, load it, and to fire it, you have a safety catch here, which you'd have to raise up with your fingers.
Okay.
And so you've lifted it out the way, and then you can now press the trigger.
And then you just simply push in.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Like
it's very easy to do, but the devastation this would have caused. How many rounds is this firing a minute?
So what we're trying to aim for is about 450 to 500 rounds a minute. So we're talking 2 bullet belts or 2 full belts in a minute.
I'm guessing this isn't just going to be manned by one person.
No, so what you've got is you've got specialist troops from the machine gun corps who are firing this one. So you've got four people keeping one machine gun going at any point. One person we could speak about who was a member of the machine gun corps was a chap called Sidney George Lewis, and he was from Tooting in South London, and Sid decided that he wanted to be a machine gunner. So he does his army training, he does his specialist machine gun training. He gets mobilised, he gets sent over to the Somme area of France, and he serves in the Battle of the Somme in July 1916. Now I've seen Sid Lewis's birth certificate, and what it says is Sidney George Lewis was born on the 24th day of March 1903. 1903 to 1916, how old was he?
He's 13 years old.
He joins up at 12 and a half. He's the youngest soldier we know about in the British Army in the First World War. Same age as a year 7/8. Imagine a year 7 with a machine gun that could knock down a brick wall at 2 kilometres.
And all they have to do is push a button and they can wreak absolute havoc on the enemy troops coming towards the trenches.
Do you want to know what happened to Sid?
Yes, please, I want to, yeah.
Well,
did he survive?
absolutely he did, because his mum realised that he wasn't at home. And so she writes to the War Office enclosing his birth certificate and saying, he's too young, send him home. And the War Office they put their arms up and said, fair enough, he's a little bit young here. He was discharged right away. But that doesn't stop Sid. He enlists at the end of the war, still underage, and he goes on to the Army of Occupation in Germany after the war, and then goads them to serve in the Second World War as well.
There's just no stopping some people, isn't there?
Exactly.
There was no escaping brutal combat as an infantry soldier during the First World War. But luckily for me, my time at the heart of the action was limited. That soldiers lived throughout the entire conflict in the frontline trenches is a popular misconception of the First World War. For the purposes of maintaining good morale, a system of rotation was put in place, allowing troops significant periods of respite away from the front line.
Rotation on the Western Front was generally split into a 4-part process. Usually a battalion would spend roughly 10 days or so, there was no exact amount, but a week and a half on the front line, as you can see here, marked with the blue marker. That was the front line there, zigzagged trenches. They then spend another 10 days just behind in the support trench, ready to help the front line if it needed reinforcements. They then spend another 10 days right back in the reserve line, which could be quite a distance away from the first 2 trenches. And then they spend another 10 days away from the front entirely, perhaps on leave in Britain. Whilst the soldiers were on the front line, they would have survived on basic rations. We're talking hardtack biscuits. By the time any fresh bread was delivered to the front, it would have been stale or soggy, and so they relied on these hardtack biscuits. Almost impossible to bite into, so they have to dip them in some sort of liquid. They then have some trench stew for their main meal, a mixture of canned beef and McConaughey's. Absolutely disgusting stuff. But if they were lucky, they could heat that up on their portable Tommy cookers. Every single soldier would have been given one of these so they could heat up their meals. But the most important 2 commodities by far were these 2 things: tobacco and tea. Without these 2 items, and of course their daily rum ration, keeping the morale of the soldiers high would have been an impossible task.
We had a most terrible period. The cooks couldn't light a fire. There was no tea. Tea couldn't be boxed up. The matches were wet. The bread was soggy, and we lost our rations and walked about in the mud up to our knees.
It's odd to think that whilst many soldiers absolutely revelled their time away from the front line, some soldiers seriously struggled with returning home to civilization, to their families, to home-cooked meals. For them, the process was just too painful, knowing that in the coming days they would inevitably be sent back to the front line, perhaps never to see their families ever again.
For the big push, the British hoped to attack the German lines in Belgium, but their allies, the French, demanded a joint operation at the point in the Allied line where the 2 armies met. This location was along a 25-mile front on the River Somme in northern France. Roughly 300 kilometres to the southeast, the German army opted instead for a limited advance in the Verdun area. By taking territory important to the French defenders, they hoped to instigate large-scale counterattacks. These would then fall victim to mass German artillery. The German Chief of Staff, General Erich von Falkenhayn, believed this strategy would bleed the French white. He hoped that the operation might also force the Allies to launch ill-prepared counter-offensives elsewhere, and to some extent, his plan worked. In order to assist their ally, the British would launch their attack on the Somme earlier than planned.
By this time, we realised that something big was being prepared, because we could see the number of guns, new guns, that were arriving on the front, the amount of shells that were coming. There'd been a great shortage before, but now you could see the railways were loaded up with guns, ammunition, wagons, and so forth and so on, and we knew something big was coming off.
Artillery and the machine gun both symbolic of the deadly and mechanised nature of warfare, would play a crucial role in this offensive. But the Western Front also saw tactics of an era gone by.
So Captain Townsley, we've just seen the devastating Vickers machine gun. Weapons technology is evolving, but the First World War is still a transition period. We still see elements of the Napoleonic Wars, whether it's cavalry charges or hand-to-hand combat.
Absolutely. So I always explain it as a changeover in time. So we start the First World War. Officers are still carrying swords into battle at the start.
Unbelievable.
That doesn't last very, very long at all. They pack them away. They're shipped back. They're only used for parades after that. But it's a war where we start with swords, with lancers, with cavalry, with almost Napoleonic tactics.
Yeah.
And by the end of the war, we're into tanks, flamethrowers, chemical warfare, aeroplanes, all of this stuff. Modern combined operations warfare.
But still, there's a key part of the offensive strategy that remains almost still a relic of the 1800s, and that is, of course, fixing your bayonet to your rifle.
Yes, so before you go into the attack, the order is given, fix bayonets.
Okay, that prompted me to take this out, whack it down like that. So, fix bayonets. It's what they were doing at the Battle of Waterloo.
Absolutely. So it's very much part of, you are going into combat, you're going into action. The British Army trains with these in the First World War as part of your basic training.
Right.
And so they'll use sort of straw dummies, and you'll go in, and it's all about the offensive spirit. Okay?
Yes.
Closing with your enemy, and you will use this when you close with your enemy. It's very important. It's still part of the British Army's training to this very day. Right. They will still train with bayonets.
Because if you run out of ammo, or your rifle jams, as they so often did in this period, you need a way of defending yourselves.
It's also partly terrifying your enemy.
Yeah.
If you have a whole battalion, 1,000 men coming towards you with these things fitted, they know that if you close with them, that's going to end up through your gut.
18 inches roughly.
Yes.
Cold steel. And so how would they have been using them on the battlefield? Is it a case of as soon as they go over the top, they're fixing bayonets?
You fix beforehand. So,
Okay.
so as part of the preparation, the last few minutes beforehand, before you're about to go over the top, the officer's looking down at his wristwatch.
Yeah.
Something that came in very much in the First World War, and you'll hear the order to fix bayonets.
At 7:30 a.m. on the 1st of July 1916, British soldiers climbed out of their trenches and headed towards German lines. Now, the perpetual myth that soldiers would have simply walked like this throughout the war towards enemy positions actually originates from this day. Concerned with the lack of experience of many of the troops taking part, some commanders actually ordered units to walk slowly in waves towards the German trenches. In reality, most soldiers would have ran towards enemy lines, finding shelter in any of the numerous craters littered around no man's land. Now, in the days before the Somme offensive, the British had relentlessly bombarded the German positions, hoping that they would destroy their trenches and their barbed wire defences. Over 1.5 million shells were fired, but many were defective. Moreover, Sir Douglas Haig, the man in charge of the entire offensive, had actually ordered a geographical extension of the bombardment, meaning that many of the German positions had remained intact. More importantly, the Germans were aware that this advance was coming. They had prepared since mid-June. They'd kept their heads down, and so when the time came, they simply manned their defences again and waited for the British to enter into their line of fire.
scrambled over the trench and went forward. Well, we were sitting ducks all the way, straight into the death trap, hundreds of us. I could see people going down all the way around getting shot. Then I got hit myself.
The soldiers were met with a bombardment of machine gun fire, artillery barrages, and a hail of bullets from the well-entrenched German troops. It was a bloodbath. The first day of the Somme was the deadliest day in British military history. Of the 57,470 British casualties, 19,240 men had been killed. It wasn't long before the military hospitals became swamped with the wounded.
Sir, first day of the Somme, 19,000 dead, 40,000 casualties, just on the British side alone. Tell me, what were the conditions like in these casualty clearing stations after those first few hours?
It's horrific, isn't it? 40,000 casualties. But we've got a clear system for evacuation of the wounded back to the casualty clearing stations, back to safety behind. We often hear about the trenches not moving very often, but it means you can build up your medical services behind. So if you're wounded, first thing you do, use your first field dressing. If you can get yourself back off the battlefield, you do that yourself.
Yes, got that here.
Good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're reliant on the stretcher bearers coming to get you.
Yeah.
16 stretcher bearers per battalion, that's every 1,000 men. They may double that up with extra bandsmen, etc. During the big battle. The stretcher bearers will bring you off the battlefield and straight down to the regimental aid post, which is in or around the front lines. Okay. Basic system here. First thing, stop bleeding. That's the highest priority. What we'll do, use direct pressure. So if you say you've been injured here, get some pressure on there, stop the bleeding. If that doesn't work, we're going to have to use indirect pressure. And what we use here is the British Army's tourniquet of the time. This works with a pad. You find a pressure point in there, get it in there, buckle it off around there, and then you twist the top. And as you twist, it gets tighter and tighter. Okay?
Got it.
That will stop the bleeding. That's the highest priority. After that, things like pain relief. What we have is morphine. Using laudanum in the 19th century, but at the moment we're using morphine. This is the Army's tablet tin. This is what's issued to the doctors. It contains a variety of medicines and drugs. And the one we're using here would be this one here, which is morphine, like that. If you've had morphine, it's vitally important to write a big M on your forehead so you can see who's had morphine and so you don't overdose your casualties.
Them, of course.
Yeah.
And speaking of wounds, what kind of wounds are we seeing from the first day of the Somme offensive?
So, by and large, the biggest injury is artillery. So we're talking shrapnel, which are ball bearings, an anti-personnel weapon fired by artillery over, and explodes like a big sort of, almost like what's called a claymore mine these days, but in the air. We've also got shell splinters. Again, the shells detonate in the air to form an anti-personnel weapon. That's the highest wounding agent. 58.5% of all wounded soldiers seen at the casualty clearing stations have that injury. The next highest is bullet wounds. When you're in the trench, you're very much protected from bullet wounds. When you get out of the trench and you go into no man's land, that's when those injuries occur. 38% of all injuries are caused by bullet wounds. 2% are caused by grenades.
Okay.
And 0.32%, so the official statistics say, are caused by bayonets.
Right.
Tiny proportion. You compare that to the 58% caused by artillery.
So we always think, sometimes people think, oh, it's going to be the machine gun bullets that are causing absolute devastation. It's actually these big artillery shells that are just fired in their millions, shrapnel, bits of metal flying off, and you're getting these sometimes gaping wounds, right? What are those like to treat?
The big problem in the First World War is wound infection. We don't have antibiotics yet. Penicillin hasn't been discovered. It won't be discovered for another 10 years after the end of the First World War. So, but we do have antiseptics. We have things like iodine. There's a very famous film called The Battle of the Somme, where a cameraman called Geoffrey Malins is filming the build-up to the battle itself and the aftermath. And one of the things he's doing is he's filming at a place called Minden Post, which is where there's an advanced dressing station, and you can see the medical officers literally with the wounds painting on iodine with paintbrushes to try and stop the infection. Every wounded soldier will get a shot of this stuff here, and this is anti-tetanus serum.
Right.
Tetanus, lockjaw, you don't want soldiers to get it, so every single wounded soldier would get an injection of this stuff here.
With so many casualties to contend with, a stringent system of orderly triage was essential to effectively treating those with minor and major wounds. A priority of evacuation was established before transportation. Major, even minor surgery was to be avoided at these early stages of engagement. In the presence of major bleeding or wounds of the thorax or abdomen, the soldier was immediately placed in a cart and wheeled to the nearest safe area that would allow the approach of an ambulance. The moderately injured were offered transport at night.
Essentially what happens is you go to a dressing station, an advanced dressing station or main dressing station, and you're triaged. Very much like today. If you go to A&E today, you get triaged or separated into different groups.
Yeah.
If you're severe but survivable, and that's the key, survivable, you're taken back to a casualty clearing station for further treatment.
Right.
Down there, these casualty clearing stations are the linchpin of the whole medical system. They're a big mobile hospital, 500 beds at a minimum, teams of surgeons, x-ray machines, teams of nurses, blood transfusion equipment. You're in safe hands if you get back to a casualty clearing station.
And that's like you said at the start, there's a huge amount of casualties, but the British do have the infrastructure. It's not like these sort of, you imagine from the Crimean War, these makeshift hospitals and there's dirt and rats everywhere and just blood and gore. There's an efficient process for the soldiers.
Absolutely, yes. So, you know, it's 40,000 casualties on the first day of the Somme, in the morning of the first day of the Somme, on the 1st of July 1916. You imagine any medical system in the world that could have to cope with 40,000 casualties streaming through. The official statistics say if you get back to the safety of one of these casualty clearing stations, 97% survive.
Wow. Okay.
So they're doing something incredibly well at these casualty clearing stations. And it's a tribute to the men of the Royal Army Medical Corps and the nursing professions, the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service, the VADs, and so on and so forth.
And so the fact that there are almost 19,000 dead just shows you the scale of devastation during the Battle of the Somme. You know, these are wounds that are irreparable. Now, if I was to come here, let's say, with a bullet wound or a piece of shrapnel in my leg, what are the sort of tools and medicines you'd be using to treat me?
Right, firstly, I mean, that's something for the casualty clearing stations. So you'd end up down there. You'd end up with these big hospitals. Some of the kit they'd be using would be, here you go. This is one of the operating sets that they would have used back then. This has all been redesigned. This is all state-of-the-art technology here. All of the kit can be sterilised before use. You sterilise it in boiling water or in antiseptic fluids. And so if you compare this set to a Victorian set of equipment, all the Victorian equipment would have bone or wooden handles. You can't sterilise that.
Right.
You can sterilise all of this sort of stuff. This is, as I say, a general operating set. Tools for all sorts of operations. Amputations, neurosurgery, tracheostomies, you name it, it's there.
Brain surgery? There would be brain surgery happening?
One of the things they were using is magnets.
Right.
German shrapnel balls are made of steel. If you use an electromagnet and a blunted nail, you can put that into the brain and bring it out.
Wow.
So that's one of the things they're using. It sounds a bit barbaric, but it works.
And of course, with battlefield injuries, some are more lucky than others. You might have a foot blown off or something. You might have shrapnel in your leg and you need potential surgery. Talk to me about the different sorts of operations that would have been done on the front.
Okay, so an amputation would be quite a common thing in a casualty clearing station. Okay, what I've got here is the Army issue amputation saw. It's for capital amputations. What I mean by that is a capital amputation is removing arms or legs, so
right?
Not decapitation. It's a big thing. It's not very good for you. Okay. You'd have to obviously knock them out first. You'd have to anaesthetise them. This is something called the Schimmelbusch mask. And to anaesthetise your patient, what they do is they place the mask over the patient's face and then drop chloroform or ether directly onto the mask, and then you inhale it.
So that's good to know that if they are going to go through amputations, they're not going to have to bite down on a bit of pencil or something.
Yes.
With no access to antibiotics, which would be discovered a decade after the war had ended, it is easy to conjure up scenes of chaotic and horrifying conditions within the medical clearing stations and hospitals. The reality was to the contrary. Treatment facilities in this period were, ironically, far less archaic than the tactics employed on the battlefield. Portable X-ray machines, brought to the front by Marie Curie, were available to scan soldiers and aid in diagnosis, whilst blood banks had also been set up behind the front lines, ready for transfusions. Moreover, those who were unfortunate enough to suffer major facial disfigurement now had a source of hope.
Many people came back with facial injuries from the First World War.
Right.
And it's a devastating thing to have. If your whole face has been smashed up by a gunshot wound or artillery explosion, then you need to have your face rebuilt. Plastic surgery doesn't really exist before the war. Enter somebody called Harold Gillies, who's a New Zealand surgeon, and he develops systems of rebuilding people's faces. He's not just rebuilding people's faces, he's also giving their lives back as well.
Wow. So an early form of sort of facial reconstruction.
Yes.
That's incredible. And would these soldiers then be sent back to the front line? I guess it depends on their injury.
Absolutely.
If it's a small shrapnel wound, they might be sent away for a bit, but
Yes.
they'd be sent back.
Absolutely. It depends on your injury, depends on if you can serve again. You could be medically downgraded. And so if you're not frontline material anymore, maybe you could work behind the lines in the warehouses or whatever behind the lines. But if you're well enough, you'd go back into action and back to the front.
Non-stop. Never stops, does it?
Even if you pulled through surgery and survived your battlefield wound, the biggest danger to your life was never far away. In fact, it was all around you. Having captured a significant amount of enemy territory, the German army often dug their trenches before the British and French, and on the highest ground possible. More inclined to stay put and defend their positions for an indefinite period of time, German soldiers reinforced their positions with concrete and steel beams.
In contrast, British trenches were less protected, they were shallower, and if the heavens opened, and let's be honest, in Flanders they were always likely to, full of water. Now, unlike the German trenches, which had efficient drainage systems, British positions soon became these quagmires of mud and water. You see those images of troops wading through water up to their knees. This, of course, led to diseases which spread quickly throughout the network.
There were three main ailments, the so-called trench diseases, that became hugely problematic on the Western Front during the war. The most notorious of these was called trench foot. The prolonged exposure to wetness and cold, especially in the lower limbs, caused troops immense pain, swelling, blisters, and even nerve damage. If left untreated, gangrene would develop, often leading to amputation. Trench foot became a serious problem for the Allies, leading to 75,000 casualties in the British Army alone. Lice also plagued soldiers during World War I. Whilst there was no typhus outbreak, trench fever, caused by a related organism, had a severe impact on troops. The symptoms included severe headaches and muscle pains, leading to temporary incapacitation. With no effective treatment, soldiers required bed rest for recovery. Though fatalities were rare, up to 80% remained unfit for duty for months. 800,000 cases were recorded in the British forces. Lastly, trench mouth, or acute necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis, affected soldiers in WW1 trenches. This condition, caused by bacterial overgrowth, led to bleeding, ulceration and bad breath. Painful gums made eating and talking difficult. Poor oral hygiene, stress, bad diet, lack of rest and heavy smoking contributed to its onset.
To combat these nasty trench diseases, more attention was placed on basic hygiene, fumigation, irrigation and sterilisation of clothing and bedding. Troops in flooded areas were soon issued with waterproof gumboots and waders, and these elevated duckboards were installed to keep the soldiers dry. Healthcare was improving, equipment was changing, weapons were evolving, and soldiers were adapting.
Despite these necessary adjustments, those at the top of Allied High Command knew that the best way of preserving lives was to end the war as quickly as possible. In an attempt to combat the stalemate, the British turned to mobile armoured vehicles, launching a top-secret weapons programme called the Tank Project. By January 1916, the first model was launched, the Mark I. Fitted with 20-metre-long Caterpillar tracks and armed with either 2 6-pounder naval guns or 4 Vickers machine guns, the British seemingly had a new superweapon that could break through the German lines. The opportunity to put these vehicles to the test came in the late summer of 1916. With the Somme offensive having already cost the Allies 300,000 casualties, Haig was desperate to stop the carnage and turned to his new weapon.
For a final push north of the Somme River, Haig had amassed 200,000 soldiers and 700 artillery pieces. But before he could launch his offensive, he had to eliminate a threat to his flank by clearing the Germans out of Delville Wood, just south of the villages of Flers and Courcelette. This would be the first battle in history in which tanks would lead the attack.
Right, chaps, move up here, go!
3 of the 49 tanks Haig had at his disposal drove in the pre-dawn darkness through a bleak terrain of shell holes and splintered trees, what they described as Devil's Wood, the crew trusting their lives in their unproven new weapons. Little time had passed before 2 of the vehicles were taken out of action, one breaking down and the other stuck on uneven ground. But one tank, led by 23-year-old Captain Harold Mortimer, continued to push toward the German front lines. He described the whole event in his memoirs.
I didn't think my tank would be the first in the world to fire a shot in anger. The whole thing seemed very unreal. I saw lots of flashes coming from the edges of the woods, and I gave the order to open fire with one of the 6-pounders. And we managed to get astride one of the enemy trenches, but then received a direct hit. I lost my tracks.
All 3 tanks were lost, but in all of the chaos and confusion that they had caused, the British infantry were able to go forward and take Delville Wood. This allowed the bulk of Haig's army to push forward to the villages they intended to capture.
The British were to score a decisive victory at Flers-Courcelette, with the villages captured and significant casualties inflicted on the German front divisions. Yet the wider offensive had been horrifically costly for all belligerents. After 141 days of battle, British, French and German forces recorded over 1 million casualties. When the Battle of the Somme came to an end, 420,000 British men had lost their lives. Within the wreckage, a glimmer of hope nonetheless shone through. A sign that, perhaps with further trial and error, the British may have found the key to unlocking the stalemate.